Chapter 19. Beneath the route office, the capital was already screaming by the time the skiff reached the upper administration dock. Not in one voice. In layers. Bell alarms from the north route towers. Short shouted orders from terrace guards. The thinner, uglier cries of people who had been walking under Beauty a heartbeat earlier and now no longer trusted the sky to stay where it belonged. Over all of it, too large to be sound exactly, the hidden pulse of the great route struck through the city again and made every visible line above the palace quarter flare white for one violent breath. The pilots wore and hauled the skiff under the emergency lower guide line instead of the upper berth because the higher approach had gone unstable. We scraped the dock rail hard enough to jar my teeth. I was off before the skiff had fully settled, one arm locked around the crown case and the other bracing on the hot metal post as the dock pitched under the route pulse. The administration quarter ahead of me looked like a painted model half shaken by an angry child. Clerks and officials spilled down the white staircases with their dignity coming apart at the seams. One route arch over the East Records wing had cracked clean through and hung at a dangerous angle, still lit in pale silver along the broken edge. A courier litter lay overturned near the fountain court. 3 servants were trying to right it while a 4th pointed upward and cried because the sky over the palace had flashed into that too large crown shape once again and vanished before the eye could fully believe it. I started running. Not toward the palace proper. Toward the East Administration Court, where Vivienne's copied strip had placed Annex C and where Marcus and Felix were supposed to meet me if I came back in time. The word had teeth. I cut across the lower records lane, nearly collided with a route clerk carrying a case of seal packets, and kept going without apology. The crown case banged once against my hip where the strap had slipped. I tightened my grip and took the service stair 2 steps at a time. Above me, the route pulse hit again. This one came with motion. The whole city did not lurch, not yet, but something in the upper capital shifted enough that the East Court colonnade rang like struck crystal. Dust shook loose from the carved seam above my head. 2 women on the landing ahead stumbled into each other and clutched the rail with the blind panicked solidarity of strangers who had just remembered they shared one fall. At the top of the stair, Marcus caught my arm out of nowhere and dragged me hard into the shadow of a side arch just as a burst of white light tore across the open lane where I would have been half a heartbeat later. The light went through the air like a cutting line. Not flame. Not lightning. Route current released wrong. It hit the stone opposite, blackened the wall in a long silver-edged scar, and vanished. Marcus let go only when the afterimage stopped strobing across my sight. "You pick dramatic timing," he said. He had city dust on his coat and a fresh cut along one knuckle. Felix stood behind him with a satchel bulging with copied ledgers and a portable route slate strapped across his chest like a religious object. Both looked as if the capital had already tried to kill them once this afternoon and failed from lack of planning. I began. Marcus jerked his head toward the arch interior. Julian stepped out of the half-dark before I finished the question. For one heartbeat, everything else dropped away. Not the alarms. Not the cracking arches. Only the part of me that had been braced for the possibility of not seeing him in time. He looked as though the capital had tried to use him as a bearing wall all day. Coat gone from him. Formal shirt sleeves rolled and marked with route soot, collar open, the pale line at his throat visible where he had either forgotten or refused the usual royal fastenings. The route pulses had gone hard on him. I could see it in the strained stillness under his skin, the too careful way he held one shoulder, the shadows under his eyes. Yet the moment he saw the crown case in my hands, something in his face changed with such naked force that I had to look at the arch wall for one treacherous second before meeting his eyes fully. "You came back," he said. Not surprise. Not accusation. A fact spoken like a breath finally taken. "I told you I was coming," I said, though I had never said the words aloud to him and we both knew it. The smallest, rawest warmth touched his mouth and vanished because the city chose that moment to groan around us again. Felix leaned around Marcus with all the tact of a falling shelf. A touching reunion is delightful, but Oren has started clearing lower custody rooms. That yanked all four of us back into the proper shape of the day. Julian's expression hardened. How far? Marcus answered. 2 boxes moved from Annex C 20 minutes ago. One clerk swears the minister ordered the subcellar sealed. Another swears he saw a control team head for the old central shaft under the east court. The central shaft. The words turned in me with instant, ugly recognition. Not the great route opening itself. Something closer to the capital's old route bones. An access line, perhaps. A core support point hidden under the current administrative quarter, exactly the sort of thing the boundary chamber had implied would sit under all the visible routes without the kingdom understanding what still fed them. I tightened my grip on the crown case. He's not only moving records. Julian looked at me. No. The single syllable held too much. We both understood the same thing now. Oren had lost the gentle version. If the city's route pulses were escalating openly and he was sending men below the old administration shaft, he was preparing to force something. Felix snapped his route slate shut. Annex first. If the original accident material goes to ash or disappears into a ministerial furnace, we lose the cleanest proof. Marcus nodded. We split only if the city starts falling faster than paper burns. Comforting, Felix muttered. Julian turned to me, gaze flicking once to the crown case and back. Can you carry it and still move? Yes. Good. He said it simply. Like trust, not permission. We took the maintenance passage Vivienne's strip had marked, hidden behind a cracked legal archive panel in the East Administration Court. The outer corridor beyond it had once probably served record porters and old treaty clerks. Now it smelled of dust, cold metal, and the stale shut-in air of spaces palaces forget because forgetting them is part of how they remain useful. Marcus led. Then Felix. Then me with the crown case strapped tight across my back now so my hands could stay free. Julian last, because if the route pulsed wrong in the corridor behind us, he would feel it before Stone did. The passage sloped down hard and then turned inward under the administrative wing. White palace stone gave way to older work. The walls narrowed. Decorative molding disappeared. The floor changed from polished slab to functional paving scored with old silver seam lines worn almost flat by time and boots. Once, at a junction where a later brick wall had been broken through to continue the passage, I saw the original stewardship insignia half-chiseled from a lintel, a 4-point star crossed at the base by a long vertical line and 3 leaf-like flares at one side. The same mark from the drifting aisle cut memory. The same root shape hidden under Oren's current insignia. My stomach turned. Felix saw it and said through his teeth, they built the modern office over their own crime and forgot to sand the bones smooth. Marcus did not look back. Less talking. The corridor opened at last into a dry service chamber lined with old iron valve wheels no one had turned in years. From there 2 doors led onward. One, according to Vivienne's strip, opened into the legal subcellar and then to Annex C. The other descended toward the central shaft and whatever Oren was doing below it. We were still early enough for choice to matter. Barely. Julian crouched beside the first door and tested the seal. Locked. Marcus was already at the second. This one too. Felix set down his satchel, pulled 3 thin picks from somewhere in his sleeve where no sane system should have allowed them, and went to work on the annex door with the expression of a man who had decided propriety no longer applied to him personally. I stood in the stale chamber listening to the city through stone. It is difficult to describe what a capital sounds like from underneath when the sky above it has begun to fail. Not one noise. Many. The high brittle singing of route current forced through stressed lines. Distant bells. A long intermittent grinding from somewhere in the upper supports. and under all of it a pulse too large to belong to any ordinary mechanism, rolling through the foundations in slow beats. The great route seal above the Capitol was not open, but it was moving against its bonds. Julian had gone still again beside the second door, one hand flat to the old metal as if listening by touch. Sweat stood faintly at his temple despite the cold down there. The route strain had sharpened him to the edge of translucence, not weakness, not collapse, something more terrible the body made into instrument until it begins to show the tune tearing through it. I stepped close without thinking and touched the back of his wrist. The contact made him draw one steadier breath. "How near?" I asked. "The shaft," he said, too quiet. "Near enough that whatever he's touching there is answering the same old line. Not the full opening. A lower support path." My throat went dry. The boundary chamber's warning rose in me again. A full great route opening by crown line alone may be forced. Cost returns to the caller until line or life is spent. Oren did not have the crown line, but he had the command-side knowledge, the old stewardship pathways, and the kind of man's mind that mistakes partial access for ownership. Felix's lock gave with a mean little click. "Annex," he whispered and pushed the door open. The subcellar beyond had the smell of paper left too long in dry dark and iron that remembered being touched by serious men. Shelves ran in narrow rows under low arches. Most held sealed boxes, legal packets, land grants no one now alive cared enough to read, and treaty duplicates between islands that had since sunk or risen or changed names. At the far end, behind a barred gate marked Annex C in current office lettering laid over older cut stone, a deeper vault sat open. Open. We moved faster. Marcus took the gate first, found it already unlatched, and swung it inward just enough to pass through. Inside, 3 storage shelves had been stripped in haste. 2 empty transport cases stood on the floor. Paper seal scraps littered the lower aisle. A clerk's wax lamp still burned on the side table beside a stack of custody tags and a leather inventory book left open to a page full of deletions and recent transfers. Felix made a sound halfway between triumph and murderous grief. He didn't get everything. Julian crossed straight to the back shelf where one set of sealed cylinders remained. Not modern record tubes. Older. Heavier. Black crystal cores sleeved in silver support rings like the portable memory columns from the drifting aisle, only bureaucratized for transport. 3 remained. The shelf tags beside their slots had been ripped off too roughly for calm hands. Marcus opened the inventory book. "Read," Julian said. Felix was already there. His finger ran down the page lines at violent speed. Custody File C-71, Western Accident Review Fragments. C-71A, Supplementary Witness Depositions. C-72, Command Ring Trial Notes, Bright Heavens. C-73, Internal Stewardship Correspondence following Incident Classification. 2 removed. 1 partially removed. 1 he looked up, eyes blazing. He left the correspondence. I went to the side table instead of the cylinders. Someone had opened 1 packet in haste and not fully repacked it. Several folded sheets lay skewed under the lamp weight, the top page marked with a brown water ring and an old seal broken long ago. The heading, in faded formal script, read, "On temporary emergency command continuity in the absence of woven accord." My pulse hammered. Not legend. Not implication. Paper. I picked it up. The text beneath was dry enough to pass for nothing until the 3rd paragraph, where the language stopped pretending to be neutral and became hideous in its frankness. Royal line-only ignition may be sustained for limited sequence duration provided acceptable physical cost to the caller is acknowledged and politically concealed. I read the line twice because no human hand should ever have written it that cleanly. Acceptable physical cost. My vision narrowed. Below it, another line in different ink, later edition, steward review notation. If woven line remains unavailable, continuity of rule takes priority over singular bodily consequence. The paper shook in my hands. Julian had come to my shoulder before I heard him move. He read the same lines over it and did not speak. He did not need to. The silence in him was worse than if he had struck the table. Felix ripped open the silver seal on the first remaining cylinder and slotted it into the portable viewer case from his satchel. We need the direct report, not merely the administrative filth. The black crystal core lit. A suspended page of memory script unfolded above it in pale silver, crisp enough that no one in the room could blame damage or misreading now. It was a deposition summary, names cut from the margin but signatures and office marks intact. Emergency command ring trial enacted at Western Crown support against Star Weaver objection. Weaver representatives warned force without answering line would overload West Braid harmonizers. Stewardship overruled. Ignition held 19 breaths. West Braid failed. 3 vessels lost. 2 stations destabilized. Capital Crown seal partially closed under recoil. There it was. Not myth. Not defamation. Not an old wound guessed at by descendants in buried rooms. A report. Filed. Sealed. Kept under Annex C while my house line bled in public broadsides. Felix's hand shook as he reached for the second remaining cylinder. Supplementary depositions. He loaded it. This one opened slower, the crystal core older or more damaged, but the key lines still emerged. Belrose House testimony entered under protest. Statement: the route answered under shared accord until command ring seized line wait. Statement cut from public summary by stewardship review. My knees nearly gave out. Belrose. Not just in a basin memory. Not in my mother's hidden letter. In the official suppressed deposition itself. I had one hand on the table edge before I realized I needed it. Marcus was reading over Felix's shoulder with the expression of a man keeping himself from committing immediate measurable crime. Copy everything, he said. Felix snapped back into motion. Already Julian's attention had shifted to the shelf tags again. They didn't leave the most dangerous one, he said. The command ring notes? I asked. And the direct accident material, he said. Marcus nodded toward the other door. Then those went below. The central shaft. The room seemed suddenly to tilt around the truth of that. Oren had not simply come to bury old evidence. He had taken the pieces he still needed and gone to the support path below, where the failing city above might let him gamble on force one last time. I looked at the crown case strapped across my back, at the open cylinders, at the inventory book, at the copied Belrose deposition hanging in pale light over Felix's viewer. Anger moved through me so hard it became almost clean. He had named my bloodline a risk in public while keeping the official proof of our warning locked under the city. He had turned Julian's pain into continuity by office note and called it necessary. He was still doing it. Right now, below us. A sharp metallic clang sounded through the far door. Not loud. Far. A hatch perhaps. A control lever. The sort of sound a mechanism makes when someone begins a procedure too old to be routine and too arrogant to leave alone. Julian turned at once. That's the lower control chamber. Marcus closed the inventory book in one hard slap. Felix, copy and pack. Cora, I'm coming. That was not argument. It was fact. He saw it in my face and did not waste breath refusing. The second door into the shaft passage stood heavier than the annex lock and older than both, bound in black metal with pale seal lines running through it. This one Julian and I opened together. Not through delicacy, through force of answering. My palm over the old ring band, his over the opposing line. The seal lit and withdrew with a bitter crack as if offended at being bypassed by the very logic it had once been built to resist. The stairs below spiraled around a hollow drop. The central shaft ran through the heart of the East Administration Quarter and deeper into the capital's old route bones than any current public plan admitted. Silver support lines threaded the inner wall at measured intervals, most dark, some beginning to glow under the city's pulses. The air grew colder as we descended, then warmer again near the bottom in strange waves, carrying the scent of dust, hot metal, and old route current waking where it should have stayed untouched. The capital above us pulsed again. This time the shaft itself answered. Every third silver support line flared. Julian stumbled once and caught the stair rail hard enough to ring it. I seized his sleeve. "Julian, I'm here." The lie was too small to be worth naming. He was here. He was also being cut by whatever Oren was wrenching open below. Marcus descended faster. Felix nearly broke his neck trying to keep the copied cylinders and route viewer from smashing against the stair wall. I kept one hand on the rail, one on the crown case strap, and counted breaths because panic would have made me miss a step and break all of us. At the bottom lay the old control chamber. No secrecy remained there now. Orn had opened everything. Half the chamber lights burned too bright. A great circular floor of black stone sat at the center, ringed by old command channels and newer office overlays grafted across them in metal arcs like scars forced over healed flesh. 3 steward officials in route coats worked the side consoles with the strained frenzy of men who knew enough to be afraid and not enough to stop. The direct capital map over the floor was alive with line pulse, the crown point above the city opening and slamming in pale enormous flashes. At the far side of the floor stood Oren Valecourt. He had shed the calm elegance of the council chamber only by degrees. His coat was open now. One sleeve had been rolled because he'd needed freer movement at the side console. Sweat darkened the hair at his temples, but his hands remained steady on the black command ring mounted waist-high before the central floor. In that moment he looked less like a minister and more like every office steel ghost the buried records had carried forward through generations. The man who always believes he should have won more lever than anyone else because he distrusts the living enough to prefer systems that hurt obediently. He saw us instantly. Not surprise. That too was a luxury long since spent. "You should have remained in the archive," he said. Marcus took one step into the chamber proper. "You're done." Oren's gaze never left Julian. "No. I am finishing what your evidence would only destabilize if released without correction." The capital map over the floor convulsed under his hands. One of the steward officials cried out because the side console had burned him. The great route crown mark above the capital flashed so bright it turned every face in the room corpse pale for a heartbeat. Felix held up the copied cylinder viewer like a blade. "We have the original report." Oren's mouth tightened by the smallest degree. "Then you know the kingdom survived because someone chose continuity over doctrine." I hated how much that sounded like the papers. Like the broadside. Like every line in the room that had tried to make cruelty read as realism. Julian stepped forward onto the outer ring. The kingdom survived by maiming itself and calling the wound governments. Oren actually smiled then. Not with warmth. With the terrible satisfaction of a man finally arguing on the ground he prefers most necessity, not innocence. "Yes," he said. "Exactly." The word shocked even Marcus. Oren lifted one hand from the command ring and gestured at the convulsing capital map above us. "Do you think roads answer sentiment? Do you think merchants feed cities on trust?" The old accord system was elegant and human and fatally dependent on mutuality. Beautiful until pressure came. His eyes cut to me then, cold and measuring and certain in their contempt. When kingdoms are threatened, a line must obey. Felix made a noise like he might physically choke on the sentence. Oren went on before anyone could cut in. "Your Starweavers wanted a world that answered relationship. Lovely. Fragile. Ungovernable." He touched the command ring again and the chamber shook as the map above the floor slammed through another pulse. "I prefer roads that can be made to hold. By spending other people," I said. That reached him. Not enough to wound. Enough to focus. "By ensuring a kingdom exists tomorrow," he replied. No city survives on ideal balance. Someone always bears the load. Better one bloodline bred for crown resonance than a realm that falls because two gifted houses failed to agree. The old chamber's hidden warning blazed through me again. Acceptable physical cost. Singular bodily consequence. Julian's face had gone white with fury and rout strain both. You knew. Oren met him directly. I understood. There is a difference. He actually believed it. That was the worst of him. Not that he lied to hide guilt. That he told himself the line between understanding and choosing was wide enough to sleep on. Marcus moved left, angling for the side controls. One steward official saw and reached for an alarm lever. Felix threw the route viewer at him. The crystal case struck the man's wrist hard enough to send the lever clanging harmlessly sideways. The chamber snapped into motion. Marcus hit the second official before he could flee. The first tried to pull free from his burned console and got half caught in the side cable array instead. Felix went straight for the command notes stack laid on the lower station and started ripping free sheets with the holy fury of a man saving scripture from bad priests. I went to Julian, not because Marcus needed help, because Julian swayed once under the latest capital pulse and the sight hit me with instant murderous clarity. Oren saw too. Stand aside, he said to me. He can still hold the capital long enough if I complete the lower sequence. No, I said. Oren's control ring flashed. The command overlays on the floor brightened. The chamber filled with a grinding hum that hurt behind the eyes. Julian's hand went to the edge of the ring support, not to help Oren, but perhaps because the rout pain in him was now too loud to stand cleanly without touching something. I caught his wrist before it reached the metal. He looked at me. Through pain, through fury, through the whole ruin of the room. Not this way, I said. Oren made a sound of exhausted contempt. There is no other way in time. He slammed the command ring inward. The city above us answered. The capital map overhead exploded into white. Every silver line over Violia flared. The great route crown point over the palace unfolded not cleanly but in a twisted half-opening that wrenched the whole support structure beneath the city. The floor under us tilted. Not the room alone. The city. I felt it in my knees, in the shift of weight through the chamber stones, in the sudden sickening angle of the capital map over our heads as the palace quarter dropped half a degree relative to the lower chains. Somewhere above, bells became screaming metal. The shaft behind us roared with falling debris. One of the steward officials hit the ground and slid against a console that had not been built to stay level under that kind of motion. Oren held the ring with both hands now, triumph and strain making him gaunt. There, he said through his teeth. It holds. It did not. The half-opened great route seal over the capital convulsed again, harder. The map showed the palace island and upper administrative quarter pulling downward while the outer lines strained to compensate. Not stable. Never stable. A forced command hold with half the sequence missing. The last missing steps. The name-bearing crown. The spoken accord. The woven answer. Everything the hidden chamber had already told us he did not have. Julian tore free of my grip and stepped toward the command floor not to join Oren but because some part of him, trained by crown and wound both, would still move toward a falling capital before his own body could object. I caught his sleeve and dragged with everything I had. Don't. He turned back to me. The chamber pitched again. Above us, somewhere impossibly far and close at once, the city of Violia began to fall. Chapter 20. The capital falls. The floor dropped under us a second time, and this time the whole city went with it. The old control chamber lurched so hard I hit the side console with my shoulder and nearly lost the crown case from my grip. Above the black command floor, the capital map twisted in white fire, the palace quarter sinking by sickening degrees while the outer lines strained to hold. Somewhere high above, bells were no longer ringing in sequence. They were screaming. Oren clung to the command ring with both hands as if the thing belonged to him by right and pain alike. The skin along his jaw had gone gray, but his eyes still shone with that same terrible conviction. "It's holding," he said through his teeth. "The city still stands." "It's falling," Julian said. He was right. I could feel it in my knees, in the angle of the chamber, in the long groan moving through the shaft walls like a ship splitting along its keel. The great rout crown over the capital was not opening. It was tearing half awake under force. One of the steward officials tried to scramble for the side stair and lost his footing when the chamber pitched again. Marcus caught him by the collar with one hand, slammed him against the wall hard enough to end all thought of heroics, and shoved him toward Felix. "Tie him." "I have archive cord," Felix snapped, already producing exactly that from his satchel because scholars are often obscene in the specificity of their preparedness. The second official made for the remaining console, and Marcus struck him across the wrist with the flat of a maintenance hook before he could touch the control strip. The man cried out and curled around the injury. Oren did not look at either of them. He only stared up at the convulsing map as if the thing in the air were a problem to be bullied into obedience. Julian pulled against my grip once more, not to escape me, but because everything in him had already turned toward the dying city. I held his sleeve with both hands this time. "Don't," I said. His face was white with rout pain and fury both. The old warning from the boundary chamber burned in me so hard it felt carved under my skin. A full great rout opening by crown line alone may be forced. Cost returns to the caller until line or life is spent. "Cora," he said, and even then his voice tried to stay gentle. "If that lower sequence keeps driving upward, the crown point over the capital will shear. You can't hold it alone." "No," Oren said. "But I can keep it from full collapse if someone with the proper line stops interfering." Marcus actually laughed. It was the ugliest sound I had ever heard from him. "Proper line," he said, and backhanded the command ring's side brace with a maintenance hook hard enough to make the whole assembly shriek. Oren staggered. "You've spent a city like kindling and still think the word proper belongs in your mouth." The command floor answered Marcus's blow with a pulse of white that made us all flinch. The crystal map overhead split into layered copies for one blinding heartbeat: capital routes, hidden crown seal, lower support lines, all superimposed so violently that I saw the truth of the machine at once. The lower command path Oren had forced was not stabilizing the city. It was jamming pressure upward into the sealed crown point and making the entire capital bear the recoil. Felix saw it too. Of course he did. "The lower ring isn't supporting the city," he shouted. "It's levering the seal." Another pulse hit. The chamber floor tilted farther to the east, and the black stone under the command ring cracked in a white-edged line. Above us, something huge tore free in the shaft and fell past with a roar of stone and metal close enough that the air pressure struck my face. Marcus seized Oren by the back of the coat and ripped him bodily away from the ring. For a terrifying half-second Oren actually fought him, not with noble composure, not with ministerial restraint, but like any ordinary man who has mistaken control for selfhood and cannot bear the moment it leaves his hands. "You fools," he spat. "You cannot govern a falling city with sentiment." Marcus drove him into the side wall and pinned him there with one forearm across the chest. "Watch me try." The command ring, abandoned, did not go dead. It kept burning through the forced sequence Oren had started, though less steadily now. The capital map above us flickered between full white flare and dangerous dimness. Not stable enough to save. Not unstable enough to stop by itself. The worst possible condition for a city hanging in the sky. Julian shut his eyes. I had learned what that meant by now. Not retreat. Listening. The pulse came through him visibly. His left hand braced against the edge of the cracked floor. His breath changed. One beat too shallow. Then two. When he opened his eyes again, whatever he had heard in the rout had stripped everything else away. The core is above, he said. Felix froze with the archive cord still in his hand. Above where? The Skyheart chamber, Julian said. Not here. The true crown point. Under the palace spire. My stomach dropped. Of course it was under the palace. Of course the hidden chamber had not lied when it said the great route closed where star and city met. The whole kingdom had been living under the sealed crown of its own forgotten road, and now that crown was tearing itself open above the most arrogant place in the sky. Marcus did not waste a blink on disbelief. Distance. 4 bridge levels, Julian said. Maybe 5 if the east walk has gone. Felix swore in scholar's Latin and then translated himself into panic. If the upper crown point ruptures fully, the route shells over the capital will lose shared tension. The palace quarter drops first. Then the administrative chains. Then we move, Marcus said. He shoved Oren toward the bound steward official and kicked the maintenance hook across the floor to me. Take the papers. Take the crown. We leave now. Oren laughed once, breathless and ruined and still somehow contemptuous. You are already late. Julian turned on him then. Not with princely rhetoric. Not with chamber-trained words. With a hatred so clean it made even the old shaft seem to hush for one heartbeat. You wrote acceptable physical cost, he said. Oren's expression changed by only a fraction. That was enough. The 2 men were not standing in the same room anymore. Not truly. Julian stood inside every year the route had bitten into him while the court called it sensitivity. Oren stood inside every neat memorandum that turned a living body into a line item under continuity. Yes, Oren said at last. Because there are moments when one life must be weighed against a city. Rage burned through me so brightly it almost steadied me. Julian did not answer with words. He stepped forward like he meant to tear the ring logic and the minister together with his hands. Marcus caught him by the shoulder before he could. Not him, Marcus said. The city. The words landed. Julian went still, then nodded once. It looked like a man swallowing broken glass and choosing not to choke until later. We left Oren in the shaft chamber with both steward officials bound, the command ring still half burned in the center floor, and the capital map above it convulsing in uneven flashes. Marcus sealed the lower door behind us with an old emergency bar and a strip of archive wire because there was no time for cleaner custody and no need. If Oren managed to free himself before the city finished deciding whether to live, we had larger problems than lawful procedure. The stair upward was worse than the descent had been. The shaft no longer only carried old route hum and hidden machinery. It carried the city itself. Every pulse from the great route seal above hammered through the walls, making the silver support lines flare and die in violent sequence. Dust fell constantly. Twice we had to flatten ourselves to the stair rail while broken masonry tore past down the central drop. The 3rd level landing had already collapsed completely, forcing us onto a side maintenance walk barely wider than my shoulders. I carried the crown case against my chest and thought only in the next 10 steps. Not the next hour. Not the next chamber. 10 steps. Brace. Duck. Breathe. Julian climbed ahead of me once the passage narrowed, not because he wanted distance, but because he could feel the route failures before Stone announced them and knew where the floor would shift first. Each time the crown pulse hit, some tremor ran visibly through him. His hand would close on the rail, his shoulders would draw tight, and then he would force his body onward as if command over himself were the last decent thing left in the capital. The sight of it sickened me with a helplessness so fierce it became almost purpose. I would not let him meet the core alone. Whatever the city did before we reached it, I knew that much with the certainty of blood. We emerged into the East Administration Court through a cracked service hatch and into open disaster. The world above had changed shape while we were underground. The court paving no longer lay level. The whole square slanted subtly toward the palace quarter, enough that broken glass and spilled water from a route basin had gathered in one corner like proof against denial. The sky over Violia blazed with fractured route light. Every visible line above the capital was either too bright or not bright enough, flaring in long white arcs that cracked and reformed over the roofs. The air itself seemed full of falling silver. People were running, not in the orderly fast walk palaces call emergency movement. Running properly. Clerks with their ledgers abandoned. Servants dragging children by both hands. 2 route officers half carrying a burned lampman between them. Somewhere to our left, glass shattered in a long glittering rain as one of the administrative bridge covers failed. The crown pulse hit again. This time I saw the city move. Not by metaphor. Not by feeling through stone. I saw it. The high western tower line over the palace quarter dropped by the breadth of a hand against the horizon and held there crooked while people below screamed. 3 aerial walkways between the north residence wing and the inner garden snapped their side guide lines and sagged at once. 1 carriage route arch simply broke and fell out of the sky in a scatter of white fire and pale stone, missing the lower court by no more than a dozen body lengths. Felix stared up and whispered, "Bright heavens." A voice rang across the court at the exact moment the falling arch struck. "Get the lower children under the east gallery. Move, Vivienne." She stood at the top of the broken fountain steps in a dark riding coat over morning silk, hair half loosened from whatever chambered dignity the day had denied her, and was directing the court with a force I had never heard from her because drawing-room composure had never demanded it. House Harrow guards moved under her orders, not the palace's. 2 of them had already cut one noble family's carriage traces loose and reharnessed the skyhorses to a common transport sled for servants and children. A 3rd was forcing open the lower east gallery shutters to create a sheltered path. No one ignored her. Not because she shouted louder than the men. Because she sounded as if the room had ended and the truth of usefulness had begun. When she saw us come out of the service hatch, her face changed only by the smallest degree. Relief first. Then calculation. Then something like grim satisfaction that all the necessary pieces were at last in the same place and still insultingly alive. She came straight down the slanted paving toward us, skirts gathered in one hand, boots showing under the hem because disaster strips rank to its practical bones faster than honesty ever could. "The north routes are gone," she said without preamble. "The upper residences are being emptied onto the east terraces. The palace guard has divided command 3 times in 20 minutes because the Queen's advisor still thinks protocol matters. I've put Harrow men on the lower bridge controls." Her eyes went to Julian. "You were right. The crown point is failing." Julian nodded once. "How much time?" Vivienne looked up as the sky pulsed again. "Less than the city deserves." Felix made an involuntary noise at that and then clearly hated himself for making it. Marcus said, "Can you hold the East Court?" "Yes." No flourish. No hesitation. A political answer made into a battlefield fact. Julian glanced toward the palace spire. The highest central tower of Violia rose beyond the administration roofs like a blade of white light driven into the sky. Around it now the broken shape of the great route crown flashed intermittently, too large to be a route, too structured to be weather. Every time it convulsed, the visible lines over the capital answered and another piece of the city remembered gravity. "The Skyheart approach?" he asked. Vivienne's jaw tightened. The west ceremonial bridge is gone. The main ascent hall collapsed at the first major pulse. The only route left is the old upper skywalk over the music galleries if the central span is still there. She looked at me then, and her gaze dropped once to the crown case in my arms. "It won't stay there long." I knew. The old upper skywalk ran from the eastern administration shoulder across the inner palace gardens and into the spire approach terraces. The same high region where the burst lamp sabotage had first bloodied the lines. Of course, every road worth taking lately insisted on crossing the exact place that had tried to shame me out of standing on it at all. A messenger guard stumbled toward us through the slanting court and dropped to one knee before Julian out of sheer instinct even as the paving shifted again under him. "Your Highness the Queen is being moved to the South Residence Vault. The Chancellor requests." Julian cut him off. "Tell the Chancellor to keep the lower bridges open until the last child is off the North Quarter. Then tell him the crown point is mine." The guard stared. Not in disobedience. In shock at hearing a prince speak like a man already halfway turned toward death. "I said go," Julian told him. He went. Vivienne's mouth went hard, but she said nothing because she understood the shape of that sentence better than any of us wanted to admit. I turned to Julian. The city tilted again. This time the motion was enough to send 3 people sprawling across the court stones and make the lower east gallery rails scream against their mounts. Above us, the great route crown flashed fully for half a heartbeat, an enormous silver structure folding open and slamming shut over Virlia's sky. In that flash I saw what the boundary chamber had shown in smaller truth. The city's visible routes were merely the outer embroidery. The real road sat above them all, broken and beautiful and trying to drag the capital down with its unfinished opening. Julian saw it too. I knew he did from the look in his eyes when the light died. "I can keep it from fully breaking if I reach the core," he said. "No," I said instantly. He turned to me. This was not the chamber under the boundary ruin. Not the route gallery in moonlight. Not the storm tower with only old stone and pain between us. This was the open breaking heart of the capital, with people screaming in the court and towers falling under a silver crown of failure, and still all I could see for one breath was his face. "The warning said what it would cost," I said. "You know it." "Yes." The calm of that answer was worse than panic would have been. Fear went clean through me. "Then stop talking like this is a reasonable decision." "It isn't reasonable." He took one step closer, not enough to touch me, because half the court was still looking our way and the city was not merciful enough to give privacy while dying. "It is necessary." There it was. The old poisoned word. The one Oren had used to excuse every violence under stewardship. The one I hated more now than I had yesterday, because Julian, unlike Oren, would actually spend himself where the other man spent others. "No," I said again, because the only alternative was to let that word become true in his mouth. "Not alone." Marcus moved between us then, not to separate, but to cut a path through the larger panic. "Argue while walking or don't argue at all. The North Administration roof is starting to go." He was right. Already one of the high cornice lines had sheared loose from the record's wing and fallen into the lower lane. Dust rolled white through the east court. Vivienne had turned away to redirect a stream of servants toward the open gallery and was somehow also giving orders to a nobleman twice her age who obeyed her as if he had remembered too late that useful women always existed. Julian took my elbow, not gently, not roughly, only with urgency, and drew me toward the inner east stair. "Move." We ran. The old upper skywalk was still there. That felt like insult. A ribbon of white stone and silver rail suspended over the inner palace gardens, open to the sky on both sides and built in an age when people still thought beauty made height less frightening. Beneath it the gardens had become chaos. Down on the lower terraces, nobles and servants alike crowded the emergency paths under harrow guards and palace route men who no longer had the luxury of distinguishing rank from body count. Above us the broken great route crown flashed and flashed again, each pulse turning the sky into something too bright to name safely. Felix and Marcus stayed with us for the first span. Vivienne held the east entrance with her guards, forcing every carriage house still breathing to take passengers for evacuation instead of display. Once, just before the first skywalk turn, I looked back and saw her standing on the slanted court steps under the white disaster sky, dark coat whipping around her legs, one arm raised toward the lower galleries as if she meant to command the capital itself into obedience if that was what the hour required. Then the first central span broke. Not fully. Not at once. Its far guideline snapped and the whole walkway dropped on one side with a shriek of metal. Marcus caught Felix by the back of the collar before he could pitch sideways into open air. The route pulse hit at the same moment, and the stone under us flashed white through every old seam. We made the far brace by speed and luck together. At the second turn, Julian stopped. Not because the path ahead ended, because something in him had gone utterly still. The sky over the spire pulsed again. He shut his eyes once. When he opened them, the answer was already in his face, and I hated it before he said a word. "The old walk won't hold all of us," he said. Marcus understood first. "No." Felix looked between the next two spans, then upward to the spire approach and back, horror and calculation fighting openly in his face. "The central lift bridge is gone. The last rise to the core is on the royal access line." The royal access line. The capital crown core had a final approach made for the royal line alone, then. Of course it did. Old systems and old cruelty all layered together. I looked at Julian. He did not look away. That was the worst kindness of all. "I can reach it fastest," he said. "If the crown point tears again before someone stabilizes the sequence, the north quarter goes next and the lower chains after it." Fear became despair so quickly I almost did not recognize the shape of it. Not because I had not known this was possible. Because possibility becoming immediate is always uglier than fear imagines. No. My voice broke on the word. I did not care. Julian stepped close enough then that the rest of them became blur around us for one dangerous heartbeat. "I can hold it," he said. The capital groaned under another pulse. The skywalk rail shook. White dust rose from the seam at our feet. "You can die holding it," I said. He did not deny that. He did not insult me with softer lies. He did not hide behind princely distance or the old habit of sparing me the worst truth in the room. This, then, was what it meant that he was no longer protecting by silence. "Yes," he said. The word hit so hard I could not breathe. Behind us, Marcus shouted to two palace guards to keep the lower walk clear. Somewhere farther off, a child was crying. Above the gardens, route light rained in brief cold shards from a failing upper line and vanished before it hit the ground. "I have the crown," I said, my fingers white around the case strap. "We do this together." "We will," he said. "Not now. Not in the shape I needed." That was the terror in it. His hand rose once, hovered as if every public instinct in him still argued against the touch, then came to rest for one impossible second against my cheek. Warm, shaking a little, human. "I need time," he said softly. The whole sky might as well have stopped. Because there it was. The truth clean of argument. He was not going to the core to finish the work without me. He was going to keep the capital alive long enough for me to reach him with the only thing the seal would answer fully. I understood. And understanding did not make it less unbearable. Julian drew his hand back and turned at once, because if he stayed looking at me too long he might become only a man and not the prince the city needed to carry its breaking crown for a few more breaths. Marcus moved into the gap before I could follow. Not as refusal. As structure. "You won't catch him on the royal line," he said. I stared at him in fury and grief and the bright useless instinct to throw myself past every warning because the alternative had just become worse than death and much more ordinary. "Move." "No." He said it with the calm of a man bracing a collapsing beam with his own back. Felix, pale and shaking and still somehow trying to think, grabbed my sleeve. "Listen. The royal line takes him to the upper core approach. You take the outer walk. It's longer, uglier, and still physically possible if the next span holds." Julian had already reached the split in the skywalk where an old narrow stair of white stone rose toward the central spire's inner shell. He turned there only once. The city pulsed. The great route crown flashed above him. For a heartbeat he stood outlined in silver ruin against the failing sky, pale hair blown back, shirt darkened at the shoulder where old dust and rout soot clung, one hand braced on the broken royal rail that would take him into the core. Cora. My whole body answered to my name in his mouth before sense had time to catch up. He looked at the crown case, then at me. Not asterisk stay back asterisk. Not asterisk be safe asterisk. Not any of the lies the world teaches men to tell when they love something too much to let it walk into danger beside them. Come to me, he said. Then he turned and ran. The royal access line lit under his feet, a narrow white road rising through the broken heart of the palace toward the spire core. One span, then another. Then the failing silver swallowed him into the central light. I think I shouted. I do not remember what. The next pulse hit with enough force to send the outer skywalk down another hand's breadth. Marcus caught me around the waist before I could throw myself after the vanished light. Felix was shouting in my ear about the outer route. Somewhere below, the city cried out as another bridge failed. Julian disappeared into the core, and all he left me with was a command shaped like trust.